Okay, our next presenter is Mr. Jompie Burger. I will just start to introduce him. He is the CEO of the Dairy Standard Agency, and the primary objective of the Dairy Standard Agency is the promotion of the compliance of milk and other dairy products with product composition, food safety, and methodology standards. His presentation will focus on safety in the dairy industry and with specific reference to the Dairy Code of Practice for milk producers. Jompie, welcome, and thank you for your time to do this presentation. We do appreciate it a lot.
It's a pleasure. Elena, can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you. You can put your presentation on slide mode.
Okay, just 1 second. Are you there?
Yes.
All right, so I just need to mute my little face here. Sorry, I can't find it at this moment in time. But I think let's continue. If you can see the slides, I'm happy.
We can see the slides and you can continue. Thank you.
Good. As Elena mentioned, and thank you for the opportunity, Elena, it's something that we look for every year to speak to industry stakeholders. It's a wonderful opportunity, if you listen to the previous speakers as well, to gather all these absolute valuable information presented by the through the NPO. It's truly something special and it really adds value. I want just to, before I start, add on to what Dr. Arvia said, and I think it's really important that we start seeing the veterinarians really get involved where possible inside the dairy operations. As part of the integral services that they do render, it makes a huge difference if you can see there's a veterinarian involved in the daily processes of the farm. I want to give you some overall approach to what we deal with when we talk about food safety. Now, in principle, we talk about food safety, and I think largely, you know, talking through the value chain is very important to understand that it's not an easy concept. It's very broad in many aspects, but it's also very specific in many aspects. And for that reason, I think it's not always well understood. It's something that we have to apply, and this is where the trick comes in. If we really want to see food safety and progress in terms of food safety, we have to understand the principles of hygiene, for example, and back to basics. We can't pass that step because every time we have tried to do that, we've ended up in a horrible reactive situation that we start treating symptoms, which is not good because it's very costly and it takes a lot of time, and it's got a huge economic risk with it as well. So the lack of understanding with regards to food safety is one thing. But I want to say to you, well, as you know, food safety and quality as being different propositions. We cannot so easily just generalize on or define quality as something that includes food safety. And I'll use the example, you can't put microbiology, for example, and a chemical product composition in the same basket. Somehow it relates, yes, but on the other hand, it's not always the same topic. So I think it's something that we have to distinguish if we talk about the issues of food safety and quality. A very simple example is if I take a bottle of cultured milk that in terms of product composition is really well manufactured, it's got all the qualities in terms of its palatability, it's got a very lovely mouthfeel, the acidity level is good. But next to it stands a bottle.
Sorry, Jompie, to interrupt you, but your slide is not moving.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm still on the same slide. Yeah,
well, okay.
I just want to land this issue that a product can appear to be, well, it can taste. From a sensory evaluation, it could be the one that's answering your approach towards quality. But in that same container, there's, let's say, a high content of bacterial load of E. coli. Next to it stands a cultured milk that tends to separate. You don't like the mouthfeel. You could say a lot about the product, but it's free from food safety risks. And that is what I'm trying to say to you. Do not overlook this element. So yes, we will see at many times when things go tough, that food safety is taken for granted at a cost. It's not always a cost item in terms of the production of milk, and it's always not a clear cost item when it comes to production, processing, and manufacturing. So keep that in mind as we look at it. So from a food risk-based point of view, I think it's very important that we start living in a proactive environment. That's very important. Looking at the bigger picture, a major food safety incident at one dairy can really cause a lot of damage in the eyes of the consumer. It rattles the whole financial stability of the entire dairy industry as an agro-processing sector, and also the integrity of dairy as a whole. So what we say is that we don't want to single out one part of the value chain, but there's a lot more. We have to consider each and everyone's role in this aspect, and it will bring you closer to the milk produced just now. What we look for is stakeholders to have a moral and legal obligation to mitigate systemic risks caused by a lack of interdependency between the parties and among the participants. Our value chain, you must have heard earlier through these sessions, it's not a big value chain. Approximately 1,550 dairy farms. There you can see the production of milk, 3.3 billion approximately. And then our processes, the established ones, 160 processes, including our producer distributors and then the 60 large retail companies. Thinking of that, we take in consideration that those farmers on the 80-20 principle, it's a 20% that is producing most of the milk. And we see the same phenomenon that the top 20 and not the 20% necessarily of the manufacturers are putting more than 85% of the product in the retail, which is quite interesting. So it gives you a diverse world that we live in, because we are also having smaller operations, with all due respect. So what happens in this value chain of ours? Why are we so eager to comply? Is it the pressure from the retail companies of late that is really putting pressure on the industry to perform? Remember, it's all about risk mitigation. Or is it the issue of fear of litigation and law enforcement? Not necessarily from Department of Agriculture or Health. It could be even in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. What about corporate governance and ethics? So looking, overarched, that there are many things important at the end of the day, and it's not about just a single farmer making or breaking it necessarily at farm level. It is a bigger picture, and we all have a role to play. Now, this continuous drive to go beyond what is required by national law, there's something that we have to talk about. It's not just about making money, it's about ethics. And that ethics tell us something. We have to live in this world of a sense of moral correctness within the dairy society for a long-term vision. We want to be sustainable, we claim. We want to be sustainable in the bigger picture as well. So we need to live up to the expectation of the world outside, but true to our convictions as well. Why? We need to satisfy the needs of the consumer, definitely. Otherwise, we won't be making progress in our world and money. Satisfy the legal compliance and that we are in the process of mitigating risk continuously, but also that we want to gain maximum benefit from available technology and risk-based food management systems. Yes, at the end of the day, it's not about just national, but also international issues. So very important that part of the value chain, we will act in a way that pass on the message of shared effort. Here you can see literally our dairy value chain on one slide, and it's all packed together. And what we say in terms of what we have to do, Yes, we know what the law says, but how do we get there? The law does not tell you how to get there. And for that reason, we thought of really a good idea to add value to the industry to put these codes of practice in place, one for the secondary industry and one for milk producers. And that fulfills the role about where we're heading. I'll show you now. We have to understand that there is a serious, yes,
Sorry,
Helena?
I'm interrupting again. If you're still on slide 1, we are on the same page.
Sorry, I'm on slide 9 already now, for goodness sake.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
you see my slide 9?
We can see slide 9 now. Thank you.
Okay, let me continue in this format, if you don't mind, because I'm going to waste time now.
Thank you.
On the issue of interrelationship, let's just go back there. It's really important that we don't start building silos between each other. And that is just the thing that happens because we have the tendency in the manufacturing environment to know some aspects, and we try to feel secure in terms of our environment to protect ourselves, but not necessarily are we doing the right stuff. So I think the issue of interrelationship that we will look at now and effective communication that leads to this interrelationship is very important. So I use the term interconnected, and this is what you see. Now, there's our value chain, all in all. So the food safety risks that we talk about, and it's also explained in terms of our code of practice, starts with the risks during crop production. That is part and parcel of the makeup of food safety. During the process of food manufacturing and milk production, and then to dairy processing, retail, and the consumer. The key here is that we have to know what we want from the party, because the one party's output is another party's input, and another party's input is the other one. So it's an input process output. And if we don't understand what this entails, what is expected from me, passing on the product to the next person to manufacture something from, we start living in our own silo, and we are really creating this problem, which we call these gray areas. And that, in other words, risk. So important in terms of integrated chain management that we understand what is expected from each other in terms of food safety. Now, that could be relating to chemical issues. We can talk about aflatoxin, we can talk about antibiotics, we can talk a lot of pesticidal residues, herbicides, for that matter. And then we go further down the value chain. But some of the most hazardous problems that we live with comes from either from the crop production, feed manufacturing, and milk production side. Subsequently, it's more relating to your pathogenic problems that could occur, which we will expand a bit later on. Let's continue. We said effective communication, very important. If we don't communicate, we're not going to know. Now, to help us through the system, and that is something that the code of practice also helps a lot with, is food safety skills. It connects very well with the issue of training. If we have people working in our establishments that's not acquainted with what the rules of the game is, not understanding the principles of food safety, you will find yourself doesn't take long when you start seeing the cracks in the wall. And the problem with that is that it starts somewhere, and on the day, a person will, suddenly this and this happened. It wasn't suddenly. It came a long way where we ignored the principles of what we should be doing. And on one specific day, following this, you get a knock-on effect, and it's what we call a critical mass. And then you sit with reacting problems, reactive. And that is so expensive. Now, we really don't need to treat symptoms. We have to go back to root cause investigation and kill that problem where it originates so that we can continue with our work. So it makes sense in terms of this interactive approach that we have, that we understand who are our suppliers. Can we rely on them? Are these people that can really provide me consistently with a product that will mitigate risk in my environment? Because that's what we do. We don't want, if I buy milk from a farmer, I will tell a farmer, keep your risks at bay, sort out, put your control measures in place. And the same happens to the Pick n Pays of the world. They tell the manufacturers, show us your food safety management systems, and your due diligence that you are indeed in a place to provide me with product that is suitable for consumption by the public. So these things do matter. In part of this interaction that we have to understand the principles of targeted hazard control. It literally means that in my environment, I have to understand the product that comes in. What are those hazards that could possibly enter through that back door into the storage facility, for example, or into my warehouse? What hazards can I expect from that product? Has it been tested for that specific criteria? Does it comply to the minimum legal criteria? Will there be a subsequent step of treatment that will get rid of a specific hazard? And then obviously, I will be processing, and I've got internal specifications that will have to tell me my product is good enough that I can release it at the end of the day. So yes, acceptance criteria is so critically important that one have to deal with it. We have to measure to know. And if you have a product that does not comply, we have to deal with the problem. So performance, the control measures, very important. We put the control measures in place to make sure that we mitigate the risk. That is important. If we put something, let's say for a washing program in the parlor as a control measure to get rid of bacteria and clean them, if our washing procedure is not effective, what do you think is going to happen? So we have to measure to know all the time to make sure we have things in place. I talk about cooperation of organizations. Let's say for the farmer, it's so important to buy your products from people that can render after-sales service, your chemical companies, your services on your milking machine, and so on and so on. That these companies you can also rely on to also contribute to your skills development and also to put a bit of training together with all the rest of it in place. Might even include pest control, for example. And your veterinarian, the company that serves you, for example. So the role of the competent authorities is so important. I know it's not always easy, but when it comes to certification of your facility, the role of the veterinarian in terms of TB and CA declarations, and the private vet's role, at the end of the day, all we can put together and say, these all play a role. So we talk about the control measures, people. I think we can't move without these things. Sometimes we take these things for granted. We expect, or we assume that these things are dealt with on a proper manner, but it's not always the case. So let's start at the farm. What are these things that we can see, something relate to possible areas where hazards can come from? On the farm, we know there's a regulation 961 dealing with milk sheds. I'm talking specifically now about the milk shed regulations. But under it, there's an element that deals with the importance of good veterinarian practices. It's covered in that regulation. It says that you have to be frequented by a veterinarian at the appropriate frequency. The role of the vet remains critical to a successful farming operation in terms of dairy production. Good agricultural practices, and this is where we start with the issue of, let's say, pasture-based treatment, where you don't follow the procedure with withdrawal of the camps when it comes to treatment with pesticides or herbicides. So very important already at that level to reduce the risk of this residues finding its way through the system, ending in the final product. We have to be alert at farm level and know what is our specifications towards what are the control measures that has to be in place. Very important one, also the good hygiene practices. Just a few examples. When we move into the factory environment, it's all about manufacturing, also hygiene, laboratory practices, and distribution practices. So the link between the farm and obviously the factory environment would also be good laboratory practices to know that the incoming milk already comply with the most minimum requirements to reduce the risk of further problems down the line. It's only then that we start talking about HACCP certification and so forth. So very important in that respect. I think with regards to, we're on the right track. The relevance for the milk producers, to emphasize the code of practice, it assists the farmer really to ensure compliance with food safety requirements at primary production level. but also to bring some assurance that the industry is very responsible, and we look after our own industry through compliance with certain criteria that sometimes go beyond what the legal requirement is, requirements are. So I previously mentioned about the targeting hazard control approach. Now, this is typically what happens, and it works on three principles. You need to be able to identify, evaluate, and implement control measures. When you look at the biological risk at farm level, it goes beyond. You have to really look at all the issues pertaining to what could be bad for the animals and what could be bad for my raw milk that is destined for further processing. That is one aspect. Now, biological issues typically would be the contamination of the milk during the milking process. We take now the situation is that the cows are healthy and that milk goes through the system. We look at the situation within the milking system in the parlor and also in the milking room. We look at the personal hygiene of the staff. What are the roles that they play? Then we look at chemical possible hazards that could appear and the risk of them being present, as I explained, where they can possibly come from, even from pest control inside the parlors setup. And then the issue of physical hazards, where there could be maintenance done on parts of the milk machine and you've got foreign material flowing through. Those are just simple examples. So what do? We have to frequent our facility at a regular basis through inspection and cleaning. Check if we find these, evaluate the situation, what kind of risk is it? And if we say risk then typically would mean the likelihood that there could be problems growing. And if we can address that matter to say, how are we going to resolve this issue? Is it big? Is it a capex item? Is it something I can fix immediately? How am I going to manage the problem? Then you put in your control measures, and that will assist you to make sure that your operation is well maintained and you mitigate your risks. The control measures, very important. I think this is where we start talking about the issues of prerequisite programs. Prerequisite meaning, what are those requirements that we have to fulfill and that we have to attend to make sure that our end product will meet its specifications. It's all about milk handling practices, the environment, the control over the environment, your cleaning and disinfecting procedures, cooling, general hygiene practices, pest control. For example, obviously there are way more. But it's all linked to this food safety management system issue. Food safety management, in essence, is basically just a compilation of the control measures that we have to put in place to make sure that the outcome meets the standards. This system is designed specifically for each and every kind of operation. There are elements that is generic by nature. We can put headings on top of them as good agricultural farming, hygiene, milking, and laboratory practices. But I can assure you there are elements on various farms that is not the same. You can't just immediately take one system and take it to another farm and just simply go and apply that, because there are other variables, including the environment, for example, that makes things different. So yes, what do we expect from this food safety management system? We talk food safety now. You can apply this on other systems as well at the farm. That the team at farm level, which include now the certificate holder, the person in charge of that facility with his team. I'm talking about the person in charge of the milking shed, of the cows, for example, of the feeding regime, and so forth, come together and they put together a plan on how we're going to mitigate food safety risks in this operation of ours. And that is basically the statement of intent. We're going to do this. You put it on paper, on a one-pager, it should be fine. But then you get to the second part that talks about the do part. Those are the issues. The do part is that how am I going to execute my statement of intent? And that leads to works instructions, procedures of how you're going to wash your machine, how are you going to deal with your cows in terms of dry cow treatment. For example, steps that you put in place in terms of hygiene and so forth. Once you've got the procedures in place and how to deal with it, You have to go on a regular basis and check whether you do what you're supposed to be doing. If you fail to check, you already create a vacuum or a gray area that increases the risk that in terms of your corrective action, you might fail. And that is where the act part comes in. Plan, do, check, and act. The corrective action should be part of the control measure to fix your problem. And as you do this successfully and you train your people to come along with you on this journey, progressively you will improve in terms of your food safety management system to deal with the matters of importance. So I think we've dealt with most of these. For some reason, something happened here. Let's just see. Okay. I want to just emphasize some of the requirements. Helena, you must tell me if I'm running out of time because we started slightly late.
You're still okay, thank you.
Okay. I think very important is that what I've said in the beginning, the issue of back to basics. These prerequisites that following us, we have to put in place. And it's tough, people, at certain times to really attend to all these relevant matters. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about maintenance on the facility. How often do you see where the milk production continues, but there's no time for proper preventative maintenance plan to be kicked in? It's sometimes where you miss a specific part of the criteria. What happens if you miss the change of the clusters at the time that you're supposed to change the clusters? You will end up in a reactive position because suddenly your plate count can jump. You can have E. coli in your milk, or it can even lead to mastitis because of lack of preventative maintenance. So it's so important to run through the facility and make sure that the system is up and running and that we are addressing any possible shortfalls that could contribute or compromise your food safety system. I think it's very important to understand you really cannot farm legally without a certificate of acceptability. That's a continuous discussion, and I want to say to the farmers, and it's very important to keep that document updated. And there are many issues relating to that. If you want to ask me questions about the validity of the document, is there expired date on, and so forth, and so forth. But the responsibility lies with the farmer, the certificate holder, to make sure that he applied for his certificate to be updated. I think that's important. The design of the milk shed, for a long period of time, we did not see new milk sheds around, and suddenly we see this wonderful new structures is going up in terms of round tables and design, and they are always, there's a lot of questions posed in terms of, do they comply with the regulation in terms of the new technology? But I can assure you that the way that the regulation is written in terms of milk sheds, there is enough room, enough space to exempt many of these new facility requirements to make sure that you can still be issued with a certificate of acceptability. And one example of that is external silos at your milk production units, which is a phenomenon we haven't seen for a long time, and suddenly there are some in the country now. How do we accommodate that in a certificate of acceptability? The facilities are there, or the facility that you can phone us and contact us, and we will gladly assist you in terms of making sure that you don't get penalized or there's an obstruction in terms of the law, so that you can be issued with your certificate. I spoke about the certificate of acceptability, and I think, yes, it brings us about one of the hot topics, really, ladies and gentlemen, is the issue of the environment. In terms of sustainability, what are we doing to ensure that with the generation of wastewater, with waste, and saving energy in our environment? That's one story. But how do we manage the environment that you don't introduce hazards into this concentrated area, which we call the milking parlor? And that is so important, that the design and the layout of the facility is so that we can try to eliminate these risks that could occur from outside. Somebody told me to put the camera off. I'll try my best. I'm still don't know how. Elena, it shows, is it off now?
The slide is still showing.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
The slide is showing and you're away. You're gone now. That's fine.
Happiness, I'm glad I'm gone. All right, good. So this is where we are. I think it's important to manage your environment because lots of the problems that we experience, you will hear about environmental pathogens that is posing a threat to our animals, also originating from our environment if we don't manage it properly. Your waste management system, also crucial. I think that we can separate the two effectively by dealing with our solid waste and also with the combustible waste that we can deal with, as well as the liquid waste. Now, the solid waste are important to attend to because often the filters that we use as inline filters at farm contain certain material that comes from the milk itself, and those are not the type of bacteria and sediment that you want to lying around. That includes all sorts of material that originates from the parlor, and that should be dealt with effectively, that you don't cause a harboring space for all sorts of pests, but also to deal with it appropriately, that you can get rid of that risk around your parlor specifically. It's not advisable to burn unnecessarily because it brings in the environment aspect again. But in many cases, it is really a case of dealing with your combustible waste, burn it in wat ons nou maar die gat daar op die plaas. But surely in certain areas you have to be very careful that you don't contravene some of the other regulations in that specific area. Your hazardous waste is an issue at farm level where you deal with all the containers of medicines and chemical products as well as syringes. And it's highly advisable that the farmers do make use of facilities that even can come through your veterinarian to get rid of your syringes and your needles. But for the rest, I would really think it's important to have a good relationship with your supplier, that you will collect all the empty containers and rid your farm of these potential hazards that you could have at farm level. Going back to structural design of the parlor, it makes common sense. You know, we don't always think of it, but a parlor takes a lot of hammering if you think of the amount of animals that is going through that parlor. And it's really important in terms of the design and the planning that these facilities are well structured. And if you start having problems with floors breaking up, it's something that you will have to deal with some other time. I know they're going to say that the saying goes that, you know, I don't have the time, I can't stop milking, but surely you have to take these things in consideration long before your parlor is in such a state that you find it very difficult to maintain, and it will just, situations will deprivate from there onwards. So please be careful in terms of the initial design, that you make provision and make sure that your parlor is well designed. Water quality in South Africa is in many respects a nightmare for some farmers. We know that from season to season, the quality varies, but it's so important that the water quality is tested regularly. Ladies and gentlemen, we've often seen that problem occurs and it just concentrates to a point, and you find the problems in the raw milk, just to find out that there's a serious problem with the quality of the water that's coming into the parlor. And yes, it goes hand in hand with treatment of the water, but the fact of the matter is, if you treat water, you have to have control measures in place to make sure that your treatment is effective and it will not cause damage in the system and also to the animals in terms of the effect that it has on the teats, for example. Storage tanks and reservoirs, very important to have these as closed units as far as possible to prevent the introduction of insects and all sorts of animals finding their way into your water supply, also contaminate the same. I think the requirements for the milk parlor structural design is so important right from the beginning, and it's a decision that you have to make in many respects in terms of layout, whether you have to consider large animals or smaller animals like your Jersey cows, that you provide ample provision for that as well. I want to continue in terms of design and layout. The principle remain smooth, washable, impervious. Yes, as blood is, so is milk. If it becomes sour, it will start eating the cement, and you will see the effect of that not long after. We cannot say in terms of the regulation, that you have to tile your milk parlour. The criteria remain smooth, washable, impervious. And that is what it is. So if you have tiles, then the law says you have to maintain that surface. If you have a ceiling, then you have to maintain the ceiling, specifically in your milk parlour. We don't advocate the use of ceilings or the installment of ceilings necessarily. Lighting and ventilation, the importance of lighting is so critical in terms of identification of the animals for treatment purposes, as well as possible blood secretion that could come from the animals and find its way into the milking system. So really important to be able to see when it's 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning what you're doing, so that you can effectively implement your procedures for that matter. So draining and effluent handling, very important. That your effluent from your plant is well treated, and that even if you consider recycling of the water, that you deal with it in a correct manner, and that you don't contaminate the environment specifically. Yes, there's lots of research being done in terms of the use of your recycling water onto pasture-based systems or into the veld, that you may be transferring a lot of dangerous pathogenic bacteria onto your pastures, and those bacteria could survive under harsh conditions and affect the animal's health at the end of the day. So pests, very important to target your pests. Don't use any pesticide specifically inside the parlour and into the milk room. Please, ladies and gentlemen, be careful. Don't just simply put out pellets if you don't know you are not going to manage it well. We don't advocate the use of all these chemical products, but rather, if you can, if by any means, it's all about hygiene. It's all about keeping your facility clean and treat your problem as with flies at the point of origin, say for instance, where you stockpile manure, for that matter, away from your parlour. So be specific in terms of the problems that you have, and try and treat them by eliminating, let's say, for example, the accumulation of all sorts of building materials, engineering, pipes and what have you, where the animals can survive and where you can harbour them. We've talked in general about this. I think it's I'm pushed for time. I want to get to the milk room. This is our sensitive area that we consider now. Beyond this, there's not much going to happen. You're now bringing the milk through the plate cooler into your bulk tank, and this is where the tanker driver will collect it. So evidently, you will have to put in adequate procedures in terms of dealing with the issues inside your parlour or in your milk room. The hygiene layout, the wall surfaces, the drainage of the floors, the tanker itself, how are you going to maintain it? We further on also don't advocate the idea of getting into the bulk tank with a broom and with shoes on, causing fine scratches on the surfaces of the bulk tank, and that is where sometimes your bacteria called psychotrophic bacteria sits, and they will build up biofilms there, and you can continue with milking as clean as you want. The minute it gets in contact with those biofilms, you are causing a problem for the factory environment, as at the end of the day, if the milk, for example, goes into UHT milk, you will see the effects thereof, because not all of these bacteria are effectively killed in good time, and they produce spores, and there's enzymes involved, and that brings a lot of problems in terms of flocculation of milk, as an example. So be very meticulous on the cleaning procedure that you follow in your milk parlour. Control over the temperature of your milk. Your milk should not be down to a place where it can start freezing, because that's chemical damage to the milk. It will evidently be detected in the factory environment at intake, and you will have to sit with milk that will have to be returned to you. So in terms of the design of the milk room, please, ladies and gentlemen, that door that is always open, where the milk collection takes place, keep the doors closed. Try to prevent the introduction of pests even dust and all sorts of pollutants that can find its way into the milk room for the sake of preserving your milk in such a way that it's not a problem for the factory environment, and as it can maybe affect your payment of your milk as well. Now, the bulk tank itself, the ones that we see today, basically maintain themselves in terms of the CIP systems and alarms that go along with it, and it makes it easier for you to control them. However, if you do not have a preventative maintenance program on these tankers, it could mean that maybe some of the balls, spray balls are blocked, you wouldn't know it, and suddenly you see an increase in your bacterial load. And then that means that you are not carrying out effective inspections on a regular basis to make sure you don't see the buildup of deposits inside your tank. The effective cooling of the milk to below 5 degrees Celsius, so important. The quicker you can do it, the better for yourself. At the end of the day, it's all about the preservation and getting the milk in such good quality state, if possible, and food safety state to the factory environment. Now, when it comes to cleaning, this is also an interesting phenomenon where you see brooms and all sorts of lappies and things used, and those are carried sometimes over from the parlor, which is, let's call it a high-risk area environment, into the milk room area as well. So the possibility of contamination of your cleaning equipment is so big that you will be transferring bacteria all along when you go, and that is just one of those sins that will catch up with you some other time. Hot topic, the good milking practices. Now, where you have to start milking and you need efficiencies to increase, it does not mean that you have to rush through these processes of the four milking stages and obviously dealing with the cows and the teats in a proper manner. Yes, we understand, but where does the problem start? We know in certain areas where you have a lot of rain taking place certain times of the year, it's difficult to keep the cows' udders clean. But I think in principle, the law says that you've got to keep the flanks of the cow and the udder clean, as well as the teats as part of the udder. But we know it gets difficult in circumstances where you cannot avoid it. The trick here is to focus on the teats and not wash the udder, because through gravitation you will pick up all these sorts of contaminants and dirt that get to the udder, contributing to your problems. What's the situation with stress? I think so important to manage the stress. Often these things do not cost you money. It's all about management. Sound management, keep the noises low, keep the visitors to a minimum, reduce the sound, and make the structure in such a way, design it that it's easy for the cows. And we know the principle is you don't want adrenaline released in the cows, because that will just simply block the flow of the milk, but rather the oxytocin that you need as a hormone to make sure that the cow gives the milk as she should. So I've spoken about these things. Prepare your teats beforehand. Make sure that you spend time looking, inspecting at the same time, whether you find lesions on the udders, where you find abnormalities, whatever the case may be, and use your pre-dipping procedure properly. It's important because it helps with the the status of the teeth and the udder specifically. If you apply it wrong, don't expect, you're wasting your money if you don't follow procedures. I'll speak to you on this issue about the after treatment. Now, these days, the strip cup method is not applied daily as the regulation would suspect you would be doing. Now, the regulation does not say that you have to do the strip cup. It says that you have to sample the milk of every teat. So, which means that you have to, at least on a daily basis, inspect those milk flowing from the secretion from the teats, and make sure that you don't detect anything that relates to this type of the coagulants that you will see on that little black plate. I think it's very important to focus on these things, do the stripping properly. You do get the advantage of removing the plug from the teat itself that Dr. Avias spoke earlier on. That keratin plug that you will find inside the teeth, you strip it out, but at the same time you stimulate the udder, and you can from there on you can move on. So it's very important that you take care of these small things and not rush through the process, because it's not to the end of the day, it's not to the benefit. Procedures for the adhesion of your clusters, very important to pay attention to the detail and not end up in this position where you could have all sorts of problems with liner slips that occur. There you can see due to lack of vacuum maybe, it could relate to other matters as well, a poor condition of your rubber liners, for example. So make sure that your equipment is in a good state and wait for the adhesion of the cluster. Make sure before you move on that the cow is comfortable. Don't slap on these things because eventually there's a cost involved. Not healthy for the cows as well. So very important to shut off the vacuum before removing the unit. It's common sense because you are going to hurt the animal by itself. You will irritate her, cause trauma, you bring stress to her, but you also in a position of likelihood to damage the teats. The milking procedures in terms of the teat dip should be followed very, very carefully. If you simply come with your spray treatment and you apply it on the one side of the teat and you do not wait for the application period to be functioning properly so that the active ingredients can work, it has the same effect. Ladies and gentlemen, you're wasting your money and you make assumptions that you are treating the teats, but it doesn't mean that it's effective by all means. So back to teat and udder health, I can assure you all this will end up resulting in loss of income. Whether you affect the animal, whether you affect the product at the end of the day, it all contributes. It's part and parcel of what you get at the end. The teat and udder health, I think we'll just have to quickly look at how do you deal with these issues in winter to protect the animal's teeth from all sorts of cracks and because of the milking, and maybe it also relates to the hardness of the water or the chemicals in the water itself, like chlorine. Make sure that you look after the teats. Also, the treatment of the animals, that you do it in the right way, that you don't damage the teat canal for that matter. Vacuum, preventative maintenance on your vacuum system, on your milking machine. Make sure that you do it timelessly, that you don't have to suddenly discover that things happen, that it's too late, and it comes at a huge cost. Preventive herd health management. The law itself is very clear on you should have a health management program, and that will be as part of your documentation. So a visit from any health authority or from the veterinarian's office or the state veterinarian, you should have evidence of the identification of each and every cow, the treatments of those cows, the withdrawal periods that you've allowed for, and when you've signed off the withdrawal period, to make sure that the animal has got a good record, amongst other, to make sure that when this is a repetitive problem, that you've got some traceability where you can work on. Is it the animal that is now simply just very susceptible to disease, or is it, what are the reasons for that, why she has so many treatments, for example? So I think disease treatment is so important at farm that we understand, pay attention to the detail, take care of the sick animals, even if it's just with regards to housing, that she are treated in such a way that she can easily return and that she can continue with production with a major loss of potential milk production itself. The treatment records, as I said, it has to be there. It's a legal requirement. You can't walk away from that. To make notes on a whiteboard inside the parlor is not good enough. Somewhere, even if it's electronic, it has to reflect where did you record the treatment of the animal and what is a history in terms of the treatment protocols. Surely, that makes sense in terms of immunization. You have to have proper records in terms of your herd health plan, the medicines that you keep, stock control over the medicines and the antibiotics specifically, the prudent use of the antibiotics, stock control, first in, first out, for example, and the disposal of your hazardous waste medicines, for example, as well. Now, very important, and I know it's also a contentious issue in South Africa with regards to the TB and CA declarations, where the support in certain areas of the state veterinarians are not up to scratch. How do we deal with this issue? I think it varies from province to province, from geographical area to another one. And I think it's very important, ladies and gentlemen, that we pay attention to the treatment, or the proactive handling of the cows, and the prevention of the possibility of brucellosis at farm level. Now, this implies many things, that you will put in biosecurity measures, but also protect your property from unnecessary, unwelcome visitors, guests, for that matter, even if it's stray animals. I don't want to focus on this because I know one of the other speakers dealt with it. In terms of the consequences of mastitis, I think this is something that we would have expected through the years. With all the things that we know, we would have performed better with regards to prevention of mastitis and getting the cows, the animals, less exposed to this highly expensive condition. Milk production losses, the cost of drugs, the milk that is being affected, the cost of veterinary services, you can see for yourself. To one stage, I think Dr. Chris van Dijk spoke about the 1 billion rand of loss of income that we have annually as a result of the mastitis problems that we experience. So it's a reality, and I think by stop treating symptoms and go back to the root cause investigation already helps a lot. These are things that will be dealt with through your prerequisite programs, the training of your staff, the hygiene, and so forth. Even back to the feed that you provide to your animals, the quality of the feed and the quality of the water. It's strongly linked to your animal health and welfare situation, and I think it's something that cannot be neglected. Now, hygiene by itself is something. What can we tell people about hygiene? I think we all know through all the training, on-the-job training, how important it is to clean. But sometimes you get to in these facilities, and we do frequent a lot as the Dairy Standard Agency, where there's no clear understanding about what is clean. You know, whether a product is chemically clean, physically clean, or micro clean, these are different propositions. And if you don't have a properly designed cleaning program as part of your prerequisites, you are going to find it very difficult to train your people on what to do, where to do it, how to do it, and so forth. So important that we maintain the rules consistently of having good hygiene. And that applies to the farmer as well, with his best friend, the dog, trailing behind, going into the milk parlor, and even smoking in the milk parlor, for that argument. So are we going to a place which is now really unnecessary? I don't think so, because life has changed, ladies and gentlemen. We deal with emerging pathogens at many levels. So if we don't stick to the principles so that we can react or dealt with these issues actively, we are sending the message to our staff that it's okay, it's not a big deal, and you will just continue with a bad habit unless of changing it. So important to have a cleaning and disinfection program in the facility, against which you will measure to see, am I cleaning the way that I should be cleaning? Am I doing it effectively? Should I perhaps get in my chemical supplier to adjust the dosages? Must I treat my water more effectively to soften the water for better results? It all depends. But I think do not neglect on paying attention to all these things. So the cleaning and disinfecting program must be there. It must be applied, and there should be adequate records that come to the milk parlor manager, or the milk, whoever the case be, the farmer itself, to make certain quality decisions in that regard. So very important for us. I'm moving forward. I just want to focus on the issue of cleaning procedures, pre-rinsing of water. That wash program, if you change your chemical supplier, you cannot be using the washing program of the previous supplier. That I've also seen. So change accordingly. Listen to the advice that you are given from your chemical supplier, because at the end of the day, you will not only benefit from the hygiene of the facility, but you most likely will save a lot of money in terms of the management of the use of your chemicals. Stop wasting. So very important. The fact that we struggle with our water quality and how we're going to get rid of the soil on the deposits on our equipment takes a scientific approach, really, to ensure that we do the effective cleaning and the deep cleaning once a week at least. Now, these could become part of your nightmare if you don't pay attention to the right cleaning equipment and also cleaning of your cleaning equipment, wash and sanitize it effectively to prevent the cross-contamination issue. It's nice to see the color coding where equipment is used in the parlor and different color for, let's say, the milk room and outside, whatever the case may be. But it's a senseless exercise if you spend money on this color coding system and the brooms are used Rosa weekend and it's all over the show. Everybody grabs a broom and a squeegee and you have no control over the process. The storage of your materials and your chemicals, very important to watch what you have in your store. How do you store it that you're not creating a fire hazard, for example, but that you at least know what you do have at hand. Some of the farmers do buy in bulk, but it's important to make sure, ladies and gentlemen, the chemicals that you buy should be from a company that carries reputability. Do not buy a product of which you don't know where it comes from, because certainly it's all about money. It's not going to save you money at all. The personal hygiene about the issue of how do we behave, it's a message that we have to convey every day, and it's good practice to teach our staff and ourselves to watch on each other, because these ritual things can easily become the norm inside the farmer situation. The clothing that we wear, please pay attention to the condition of this protective clothing. Remember, we are not protecting necessarily the milk, us from the milk. We are protecting the milk from us as well. So wearing the right protective clothing is so of importance. And what do we do with these things after use? Do we wash and sanitize it and allow it in a space to properly dry on a daily basis, or is that part of your problem? Now, the training issue should be very effective. The MPO makes provision for this training material. There's adequate, wonderful training material in this respect, but I think the continuous training is so important. It does not mean that if you train your staff on an annual basis or once a year, that is good enough. Sometimes you need refresher training as well. Is that good? Right, we ended, we're going towards documentation. Very important.
Somebody's not muted, Nico du Plessis.
Okay, so quickly, let's just deal with the documentation part. Remember, we have set up now a food safety management system. The plan, the statement of intent tells us that we have to go about in an orderly manner about the rules. How are we going to apply the rules upon which we agreed upon? So we said that management commitment is telling us now, this is how we're going to work. And then you put the basic documentation together. How do you do it? You've got your statement of intent, very simple, very personalized to your facility, focused on the job, what should be done. And then you lay out your works instructions. And we talk about training, ladies and gentlemen. These works instructions on how you have to go about to do certain follow protocols and procedures is very much linked to the job description of people. Very important. So I think bear that in mind. Your works instructions will be intertwined with your job descriptions at some or other stage to make sure your staff understands. You may think they understand, but it doesn't mean that if they sign on paper that they do understand. And that is where the check part comes in. So you have your statement of intent, you have your works instructions, and now you're going to go check. Some of these things you will do on a weekly basis, some on a monthly basis, many of these things on a daily basis. And you have to issue the work to other people as well. You can't put this work in the hand of one person. Very important. So train the people so that they can train other people. Train the trainee. That is the concept that is flying. Liliana, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, Jompie.
Okay, we're nearing the end. So if you battle with documentation and how to put it together, we've got good examples that we can help you with. We can also help you with in terms of the legislation. That's so important that you understand what are those minimum raw milk specifications that you have to adhere to make sure that you comply with the regulation. A very also contentious one is you have to take in consideration that the law says that your raw milk destined for further processing should be free of pathogens. Now, it's highly unlikely that's going to happen. So we're in the process of revision of that specific regulation to help the farmers to understand or get to, from a specific point of view that it makes sense. E. coli in raw milk destined for further processing is quite a unique one. We often find that it is said that any case that the milk will be pasteurized in the factory environment, and pasteurization kills off all these pathogens. But we have to understand that we are transporting pathogens into the factory environment where it's also transported, and the likelihood that we can contaminate final product as a result of the bacteria hiding in the factory. And I call on Listeria as an example. It's a common phenomenon. It's to the point that we start dealing with a very dangerous type of strains of Listeria, then it becomes a serious problem for all of us. Now, on-farm test, I think we've got the alizarin test that's been coming a long way with us, and that is what is to take place at farm level. So please pay attention to the execution of this test and what you observe, that the interpretation of your results indeed are correct, that you don't make a mistake of declaring a dispute and it might not be necessary. Please pay attention to that. Be there when the milk is collected. Make sure that the guys follow the right procedure so that you don't have questions later on during the day about disputes being declared about the safety and the condition of the milk. I think the problem areas in the raw milks, definitely the coliforms, E. coli, plate count, salmonella, and then your other pathogens, the staph, it's also part of your mastitis program problems. So it can easily happen that your farmers can also transfer, or your milk handlers, the problem from the cows into your bulk tank, and that can also continue through the system. Ladies and gentlemen, I really tried to touch on many of the issues, but I couldn't go into depth. I hope that it meant something for you.
Thank you, Jompie. We've got one question so far with regards to the ethics of improving your dairy products. Have you seen fellow dairy farmers assisting each other in improving their quality, or is competition in the dairy industry an obstacle with regard to that?
Competition is definitely one of the issues, but competition is not necessarily bad. I think helping each other obviously makes sense. If you specifically talk about dairy farmers, I have often seen farmers taking hand and helping each other through difficult times, and also, when equipment break down and there's a lack of freely available equipment like rubber liners, farmers, they can really assist each other in many respects. We've seen that, but the element of humankind is always there. I cannot talk about that, but the principle remain is that in terms of ethics, you have to work together. And you have to work together with a mindset that we're doing it in the interest of the industry. There are days after tomorrow, and the same can happen to you as well. So one has to be very careful in terms of your time.
Jompie, I don't know whether it's my sound or yours, but I can't hear you anymore. Can somebody just indicate whether they can hear me?
I can hear you, Jan.
Okay. Sorry, did I interrupt your answer?
No, I'm finished. Sorry. About the ethics, it's just, it's a timeless biblical principle. What you sow is what you reap. And I don't want to go there, but I think the bottom line is that do good, do the right thing. And at the end of the day, we all benefit from each other. We learn from each other. And nothing wrong with showing kindness and goodness to your neighbor.
Thank you, Jompie. Dr. Martin van der Leek has something to ask you.
I'm listening. Ilian, can you repeat the question?
Get, right?
Yeah, you go.
On a sick cow. We still have a mic open?
Yes, yes, I'm listening.
So what I wanted to say is that as dairy standards, you pull everything together. And I think that's very, very important.
Sorry,
Can
Dr.
you
Martin, there's a cross.
shut off that microphone? All right, Jompie, let me proceed with my questions. Most people will not be aware, but dairy standards also looks at the actual standards of product. Can you just give us a short little review of the changes that happened in the labeling of yogurt, for example?
Oh, yes. I think it's not only in South Africa, but it seems like a world phenomenon that due to competitiveness, you find that certain companies do go into the reformulation of dairy products. Now, initially, yogurt was made from milk that has been heat treated and inoculated with a yogurt culture. And that was it. So through the years, obviously, we were permitted to add certain additives to the milk, and that relates to stabilizers, obviously, to improve the quality. The addition of stabilizers may not, however, affect the composition of the milk. It may not replace the nutritional value of the milk. So any of these additives, which now also include preservatives, do take place so that we can, in terms of preserving the product to get to the retail and the consumer, that is permissible in terms of the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. Over the years, with the reformulation, we found that the regulation has moved on. And when you look at the Codex Alimentarius, it makes provision for the Codex standards for fermented milk products. And in that case, it is permissible to use dairy products in the making of yogurt. Now, what would be dairy products? Those are derivatives of dairy products. It could be whey powder. It could be milk powder, for example. It could be casein to a certain degree, but it may not come from any other product than a dairy product. Those things are allowed to be added to yogurt as dairy products. So what you have is you may make a yogurt. Let's talk about plain yogurt now. You may make a plain yogurt consisting of milk, fresh milk, but it can also contain reconstituted milk that you've reconstituted from milk powder, but it can also be of recombined milk, which now contain constituents of milk products. That is whey powder and so forth. So that combination must still give you the required compositional criteria to which you have to comply with in terms of your fat, your protein, your solids, non-fat, or whatever the standards are applicable to yogurt for that argument. So things have changed. The question is now, how does it affect the farmer in terms of his milk production if you permit it to now, for example, be in a position to import milk from another country at a fairly low cost, and you reconstitute it and you use it in your milk. Now, those are the games of the economics, and that I can unfortunately not deal with that. But the fact of the matter is the world in terms of the technology has changed, and the argument goes that it's far more easier now to make dairy products more freely available at a so-called lower cost to the consumer. Now, it may become laughable because we've seen these products where some of it was made and it started off as a yogurt-based dairy snack, as an example. Now, what is a yogurt-based dairy snack? Now, sorry, Helena, is it still good to talk?
You can continue, Jompie, but if we can wrap up as well.
I have another question for Jompie, though.
Yes,
Now,
I want, yeah, okay, let's continue.
this is very important information, I think. There is a lot of detail that Jompie is sharing, but I think it's important that we understand how the dairy industry protects and promotes itself.
Yes, I think, Martin, what is key is that we, in terms of labeling of product, you must remember that we are governed under 3 different laws. We are governed in terms of product composition under the Agricultural Product Standards Act. We are governed in terms of food safety when it comes to labeling under the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act, under the labeling regulations, but under also the Trade or the Legal Metrology Act, where we look at legal metrology, weights and measures. So when you look at a product and you want to read the label, all 3 of these acts are very clear that you may not mislead the consumer. In other words, I cannot try to convey a message on the label which is not in line with what's in the content. And that often becomes a problem where we also talk about the issue of corporate ethics. What are you doing? What are you telling the consumer about this product? You may, for example, of late bought or seen on the shelf, I hope you live a healthy lifestyle, plant butter. What on earth is plant butter? So the dairy terms that's being used on fat spreads, for example, that contains no butter, no dairy. That is now, these days, the major problem that we have, where companies run to the office of the DTI in Cipro and they register trade names of this nature. And then it gets used on products that do contain dairy terms, on products that's not really dairy related. And that is a problem of intergovernmental relationships where government structures don't talk to each other, and it makes it very difficult for the consumer to understand what is going on his label unless he reads the back on the list of ingredients.
So, Helena, will you allow me to ask one more question of Jompie?
Please go ahead.
This is also another incredibly important area, and I feel we should touch on that, and that is animal welfare. And
yes.
Jompie, can you give us just a little bit of idea also between the relationship of, say, a Woolworths or a Pick n Pay and how they see animal welfare?
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Yes, I think what we see the drive lately is 2 things. People don't want to eat or drink product that is somewhere there's growth hormones involved. But there's a very strong emotional message that come along with it. If you speak to the retail companies, they will tell you quickly that that's what the consumer wants. But to us, that's not the issue primarily. Primarily, there's a very strong drive in the world out there that animal health should be looked at, and it should happen in a way that it's meant to be. Animal health and welfare is what it is. And what of late happened is that we've set up a standard together with the SABS. It's a South African National Standard 11649, the welfare of dairy animals. And in that standard, it clearly prescribes as a voluntary standard and prescribe what you should have in place as standards to ensure that you comply to the minimum requirements of animal welfare. So what the Dairy Standard Agency did, because it's very important for the industry to also, if you say there's a standard, you have to measure against it. So that we as a Dairy Standard Agency, together with industry, compiled a list of audit criteria to which we measure to know. So in other words, we are in the process now to say that if somebody makes the claim towards the milk of animals that you will find in this container comes from animals that is subjected to animal welfare standards, you should be able to prove the truth. And the retailers are now really pushing for this to make sure. And the awkward part is this is not always about clear intent. It sometimes relates to profit margin. It's soft selling techniques to say, look at this milk, it's better than that milk. So if you cannot clearly distinguish between what is conventional milk and milk coming from cows that has been subjected to all sorts of animal health standards, then it's also conveying a misleading message that could appear on the labeling. But yes, there's a strong drive from the retail. We pay attention to that as well. We learn a lot from the IDF and the FAO in respect of that. And we've got a wonderful standard now that we use. And even in terms of Milk South Africa, we are doing a lot of research and a product that is now going out where we'll be frequenting 12 farms to measure and do some validity tests on the standard itself for the future.
Thank you, Jompie. Very valuable stuff. Helena, I see there's one more question, if that's
Yes.
okay.
There's one more question, Jompie, from
That's
Ila
good.
Hirkel. What is the approved protocol on discarding of dead animals on the farm?
Very interesting one. You may have heard, look, most of the farmers do bury the animals, but it's all subject to what is the cause of the death. So normally what will happen is there will be interaction between the farmer and the veterinarian. If the reason or the cause of death is known to the farmer, he will know. Then he will continue with the burial of the dead animal. I've also seen that where cows are being buried into the manure, the dry manure, and within 3 months you can hardly find a trace of that dead animal. Based on, let's say, the animal may have died because of a notifiable disease, that's another story. Maybe in terms of the survival of pathogens in the manure, I don't know. But the normal practice would be to bury the animal and make sure that a proper protocol is followed in that regard.
Thank you, Jompie. Thank you for your time and the presentation.
One more
It's much
question.
appreciated. Thank you.
Is there another question?
Can we ask? I think it's also an important question. Excuse Helena for jumping in.
Yes, I'm only seeing it now. Sorry.
Yes. Ilse is asking about the docking of tails.
Yes, the standard itself does not allow the docking of tails. So from an animal welfare point of view, I know there are hygiene-related issues why people or farmers still do dock the tails, but I tell you, this is far few in between. We hardly ever see that anymore. And that is the reason that you don't want the cow to swing a tail all over, slapping the milkman in his face and also contaminate the environment around itself. But the fact of the matter is, tail docking is, for all practical reasons, when it comes to animal health, not permitted.
And I
According to the standard.
Jompie, that it's quite effective to just cut off the tail switch.
Just to trim it, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, indeed.
Okay, I think that concludes the day.
There's one more question, Helena. Are we finished?
Well, I can't see it. If somebody else
I'm
can
putting
see
it
it, you can
there.
go ahead.
No, it was me. I wanted to ask if we finished.
Well, okay, no, we've finished. Thank you, Jompie. I can't
So it's
see
a
other
great pleasure.
questions.
Yeah. If anybody is interested in more information, you can frequent our website, www.dairystandard.co.za, or you can phone myself or one of my colleagues, and we will gladly assist you with respect. If we don't know, we find out. We'll let you know.
Okay, thank you, Jompie, and thank you for your time.